Welcome back. Let's now learn about the bind method. Uh, just like the call method, bind also allows us to manually set the keywords for any function call. Now the difference is that bind does not immediately call the function. Instead, it will return a new function where this keyword is bound. So it sets to wherever value we pass into bind. So let's continue with our airline example. So let me just copy the code here. Now again, uh, Now again, this will not call the book function. Instead, it will just return a new function where the keyword will always be set to Eurowings. So let's just create a new function called book AW. So for that, so here we'll just create a constant book AW. We'll set this to Eurowing. So book AW, we'll just say book dot bind of this, and then we'll just simply copy this and do that, and then we'll paste. We'll just say book EW dot bind. So here we'll just say book EW of 23, and then here we'll just say some name called Stephen Williams. Okay. And as you see this now, it looks like a normal function call again, and that's because this function here already has the this keyword set into stone basically. So here of course we no longer need to specify to these keywords again. So so the signature here, so the name of parameters is back to being simply the flight number and the passenger name. Okay. So let me just show you the output. See, when we run here, Stephen Williams booked a seat on Euroflight EW23. See, okay. And now we could now of course go ahead and do the same for the airlines, all the airlines. So create a one booking function for each of the airlines. Let me just do that. So here we'll just say constant book LH equals to book dot by of Lufthansa. Okay, and also here let me just say constant book LX equals to book of by Swiss. So here I'm not going to show you every output. So here, as you can see here, in the Swiss airline as well, in the booking section as well, you can see here the so here we haven't declared for these two. We have just only declared for this only book EW. I'm not going to show you for these two examples here right now. Okay, so moving on, we can actually take this even further. So in the call method, we can simply pass multiple arguments here beside this keywords, right? So in this bind method, we can actually do the same, and all of these arguments will be basically set in stone so that they will be defined, and the function will always be called with the same arguments. For example, we could use bind to create a function for one specific airline and specific flight number. So let's say book EW, just like we had here, but then really specify only for flight 23. So here let me just say constant book EW 23 equals to book dot bind, and then here I am just saying Eurowings, here the flight number 23. Okay, So here the function is book EW23, and then here the number you are seeing, right? The number was preset in the bind method. So we need to only place the name, right? So let's book a flight, for example. Let's just say book EW23 of with P, and then here one more example, book EW23 of Martha Cooper. So when we see the output, as you can see here, booked a seat on Euroflight, flight was a number, and then see here we got the output. So this allows us to set in stone captain arguments, and so this function, this resulting function then becomes even simpler. Okay. So we need to pass in the passenger's name, right? And then set, and then the rest all happens automatically. And by the way, what we did here was basically specifying parts of the arguments beforehand is actually a common pattern. Is called partial application. So essentially the partial application means that the part of arguments of the original functions are already applied. So which means already set. So that's exactly what the book EW23 function is, right? So essentially the book function with the 23 already predefined. Great. So hopefully this was a nice example for you to understand the call, apply and bind methods. But there are also other situations in which we can use the bind method, and it is very useful. And one example of it is when we use objects together with the event listener. So let's write that here actually with the event listeners. So let me just say here. Now this button here, this will come into play, and maybe you are wondering about that. So let's start by adding a new property only to Lufthansa object. So let's just say here Lufthansa object. Here we are just setting, adding the new values. We are just setting the planes to 300 here. Okay, so we added a new method to Lufthansa object, which is to buy new plane. So function. So here we'll just say Lufthansa dot buy plane. Here we'll set this to function. So in here we'll just console.log this. Okay, and we'll set this dot planes plus plus. Okay, so outside we'll just say console.log this dot planes. See here we are getting the undefined, right? So let's just inspect our screen. Here we have the class of Paul, right? Sorry, here we have for this button we are doing, right, by a new plane. So for this class, as you can see here, it is just class by, right? So here we'll just set document dot query selector of which is by class, and then here we'll just say add event listener. For that here we'll just say click, and then here Lufthansa dot by plane. Okay, when we run this, yeah, here this console.log should be here inside, and then when let me just remove this here and save it. So when we click on this new button, new biplane, as you can see here, we are getting the class because this here we are getting because we defined console.this. So this here will give us this output, and then when we are just logging out this here, we are just getting nan. So which is not a number. So we got a not a number here, right? So the plane is now not a number, and the reason for that is this keyword is the button element. Okay, And do you know why that is? Well, in one of the theory lectures, we learned that in event handler function that this keywords always points to the element on which the handler is attached to. So the handler here is right now attached to here this click here, right? So here we are getting the map, which is not a number. So yet here we have another proof that this keyword really is set dynamically, because if we simply call Lufthansa biplane out there, so if we simply just say here Lufthansa dot biplane, as you can see here we are getting the value 300 plus here it is getting plus 1, so 301. So here when we write this line of code, then of course the keyword would be the Lufthansa. So this object right here, because that the object calling the functions in this case is of course the event listener function calling this function, okay, and therefore the button itself then will become the this keyword. Okay, here we see the result of calling this button out here. Now of course in this event handler function here we still need this keyword to point to the Lufthansa object itself, right? Otherwise the logic here will not work. So this means that we need to manually define this keyword here. And how should we do that? Should we call the method or the bind method? And well, we need to pass in a function here and not to call it. And so you have already know that the call method calls the function, so that's not what we need. So therefore we use the bind, because we already know that bind is going to return a new function, that is the keyword should be Lufthansa, and that's exactly what we require right now. So let me just turn this here off, and then here itself add bind thumbs up, and then when I save it, so when we click this, as you can see here, now we got our output. See here it got added here the planes, which is 301, and then here the booking, as you can see here, it just see here we got our output right now. So here it is an object, here it is the planes, and then here are the bookings, as you can see here. See, whenever we click, we are just going to buy a new plane, so it is going to add it here. So this now points to Lufthansa, and now one final example here, which is again going to be the about partial application, because this is another big use case for bind method. So let me just write down here partial application. In the case of partial application, many times we are not even interested in these keywords, but still we use bind for this. All right. Now remember, the partial application means that we present parameters. All right. So let's start by creating a general function which adds a tax to some value. So let's start with the tax rate and then the value itself. And let's write a arrow function here. So here let me just say constant add tax. Here I'm just setting here this to rate and then value. So using the arrow function here, value plus value into rate. Okay, and then here we'll just console.log. I'll just say add tax of 0.1 comma 200. So this means that which is the 10% of 200 is 20. So when we run this, our output is 220. Okay, so this here is the general function of adding tax. But now let's say that there is one tax that we use all the time. So let's just create a function for that. For example, here in Portugal, the VAT, which is value added tax, is 23%. So we can now use the bind function on this function and present the rate always, that is always this 23%. And then we can have a function which only calculates the VAT for whatever the value we pass in it. So let me just add that here. So let's just say constant add VAT equals to add tax dot bind of null, and then which is 0.23, which we are like we want 23%, right? For that we are using, right? So here the null is the this keyword not required here, so we are just using the null here. So here it is the 0.23, which is the rate here. Okay, so this means nothing but here add VAT equals to value for a function here, and then value plus value into rate, which is the same here. So and then we'll just simply console.log add VAT of 100, for example, and also console.log add VAT of 23%. So we'll see the outputs here. See here, we got our outputs. And I hope this makes sense when you want to do this yourself. Just keep in mind the order of the arguments here, which is the rate and value. Just don't shuffle this and write. Okay. Then it has to be the first argument in this function. Otherwise, it will not really work here. Now, you could argue that what we just did here could be easily done with the default parameters, but this is actually different because this here is creating a new simple more specific function based on one more general function, which is the add tags function. And of course the example here could be a lot more complex too, right? So this is really different because using the binds actually it gives us a new function. So it's if we return a new function from the add tags function, and actually now I have a challenge for you, which is essentially to rewrite this whole example here just by using the technique of one function returning another function. Then I want you to essentially create a function that can return a function which will do just like this one does. So probably that's a small challenge. So just pause it and try to do it. It is based on previous videos as well. So here we'll just say, so just take your time. If you are not success also, no problem, we'll just do it together. So here we'll just create the constant here, add tax rate. Here we'll set this to function of rate, and then here we'll just say return function value, and then here we'll just say return value plus value into rate. Outside we'll just say constant add VAT 2 equals to add tax rate of which is 23%, right? We want, so which is 0.23. Okay, and then here we'll just say simply console.log add VAT 2 of 100, and then here we'll just say and then here we'll just say console.log add VAT 2 of 23. See, when we run, see here we get the both the same results. So we can write this way or this way as well. So if we are using the uh, arrow function, it might look complex, but some cases it is very useful here. But you can also write this way. So this is the most default way everyone writes. So as you see here, the result is the same as the VAT2 here, which is the VAT2 here, and then the add VAT. See here, this one and this one both the same here. Okay, so that's why you can see here the values also same here. Now, just to recap, we created the function which is the written one, and then the first one is the one that's going to need the rate here. Okay, and because the rate is also what we use to define the add VAT, right? The resulting function is then the one which makes the value, and that's why here we have the value here in the inner function too. As you can see here this one also here. Now, this is just another way of doing the same thing, and that is already pretty advanced stuff here now. So let's just move on to the challenge video, which we're going to see next. That's it for this video.